Hi, this is Buddy X from the Candid Frame, and today I want to talk about implied relationships. When we go out to make photographs, we're usually looking at our subject matter, and we're pretty focused on that. And as you get more advanced in photography, you start paying more attention to what's in your background or what's in your foreground, and you start thinking about the relationships between those things, especially when you want to make sure that it's easy to read your subject matter. But one of the things about photography is that it creates this implied relationships between elements in a scene that normally don't have any relationship to each other. I mean, when we go out there and we're walking around and we're taking a look at things, we're not thinking about them being connected in any way. But when you raise the camera to your eye and within the context of the frame, suddenly things that have no relation to each other suddenly can and do. And that's one of the things that I wanted to touch on with how you can take advantage of that as a photographer, whether you're practicing street photography or any kind of photography at all. Now here's an example. It was shot by Alistair. He did this with a Canon EOS 760D, shot at 1/100th of a second at f4 at ISO 200. Now we have what looks to be like a construction site, and they put up these walls, or these walls, for lack of a better word, that separates the street and the construction site. And in this case, it looks like they had some photographs of painters painting on the walls to sort of indicate that something's in progress. So this is a pretty common motif in street photography. You have a wall with a billboard, artwork, a poster, and you wait for someone to walk in front of it, juxtapose that person with that background, and you make your shot. And sometimes there's a connection there, sometimes there's not. It's just more often than not just a backdrop. There's no relationship implied there. And it's one of the weaknesses I see of a lot of street photography where it's nothing more than just juxtaposing one thing against another, and it's supposed to mean something or say something. And more often than not, it's not. But it's one of the easier ways of trying to make a more simple and easily readable composition. But here's an example where I think there's something at play that makes this work a little more than normal. And for me, it's the color. We have the paint roller in the back, and then we have this woman in this red coat walking in front of the wall. And it's that red of her coat and that roller that makes the connection. Now, I'm assuming that this billboard in the back was black and white except for that splash of red. I'm assuming that Alistair didn't change this in post. So I'm assuming that this is how he saw it. But look at the connection that's made as a result of those two bits of red in the frame. Suddenly, it becomes more than just a backdrop where this couple are walking past. Suddenly, there's this connection between the wall and her, just as a result of them sharing that similar color. And that's one of the things that I really like to do when I'm out in the street, is to look for things like that. I like creating relationships just based on color. So I may have something in my foreground or in my background that I think serves as a nice counterpoint to my subject. And more often than not, I'll find the setting first. I'll find the overall scene first, and then it's just a matter of waiting for someone to come into the frame that helps provide that connection. And in this case, waiting for that woman in the red coat. Sometimes it comes immediately. Sometimes you got to wait a little while, 15, 20 minutes, sometimes even longer. But this is one of the things that I talk about constantly when I'm teaching my photography workshops, is this idea of finding your setting first and then waiting for the person, the element, the gesture that helps sort of complete the shot. Because in this case, you sort of are slowly building the photograph. And if you have an eye for stuff like this, you can find it all the time, rather than roaming endlessly up and down the street, hoping that something pops out at you that you can immediately raise your camera to your eye and make a photograph. instead of looking for that instant and hoping that you react quickly enough to make a shot, you can hunt for spots like this and then slowly just allow the changing theater of the street to suddenly, converge in front of your lens and have something wonderful happen. So looking for color is one of the great ways of being able to do that. Now, here's an image by Kimberly, Britt, Saros, shot with a Olympus EM10 at 100th of a second at f4, ISO 400. And here it's a black and white image, so we're not dealing with color at all here. But we are dealing with line and shape in this sort of wonderful graphic pattern that persists throughout the frame. And when you take a look at this shot, you immediately make a connection between the woman on the left and this man on the right side. They don't know each other. They have no relationship to each other. But suddenly, because of the graphic nature of the shot, because of these lines, we make a connection. Not to imply that these people are related to each other or even aware of each other. They're not. But the way we experience the shot creates a connection. I mean, if you start off with him here, our eyes are led down to the bottom of the frame. Here, led up to her. We move up, and then these lines here lead us right back here, full circle. So there's this wholeness that's created by the shot. And there's an implied connection between this person and that person because of the framing. And this is, again, a situation where I suspect that Kimberly saw the potential of that moment, saw what this scene offered her. And more than likely, she had to wait a beat before this happened, where she had the people right in the spots where it was sort of ideal. And for me in my photography, when I find scenes like this, I stay a while. Because let's say I do want two people, exactly where these two people are. If it's a busy and active scene, you're getting all kinds of variation. You have someone up here at the top of the frame, and there's a person down here in the stairs, or there are three people walking together. There's just all these variations, many of which just don't work, right? So you just have to be patient. But if you find the scene and you see the potential of the scene, and you see how it works graphically, you can take the time to carefully compose your shot, try to decide what you include in the frame, what you eliminate from the frame, and then you just wait. And you just wait. And if you're patient enough, it almost always pays off. And you get people right where you need them to be. I don't know how that works, but I have found, with few exceptions, that usually works for me. Not to mean that I get great shots every time. I think that's not always the goal. I mean, it is sort of, but not really for me, because what I'm doing every time I go out there and I recognize scenes like this and I start waiting for people is that I'm just practicing. I'm practicing seeing. I'm practicing developing an eye to recognize the potential of moments like this. Here it's based on line and graphics, but in the other shot it was based on color. But letting line or color or some other element really guide me to a space or a place, to a moment where I just stop, and then I just allow the world, the theater of the street, to happen in front of my lens. And hopefully I'm ready enough to make the photograph. Now, here's a shot by Tyler Simpson, shot with a Ricoh GR at 1/400th of a second, f16, ISO 200. Now, we have this person here who's costumed with his wig, with his outfit that look like little wings behind them. And we have this hand jutting out from the left. And I have no idea whether this has anything to do with this. I suspect that it probably didn't. It looks like this was probably some fair, some event where people were costumed and dressed up. So there was probably a lot of activity happening around where Tyler was. But he decided to frame this shot and to minimize all potential distractions. I mean, he moves down to about chest or stomach level to shoot up in this shot. And more than likely that was because there was a lot of distractions around. Okay? But he chooses to include this hand and this arm in the left hand of the frame, which for me makes the shot. Now imagine this photograph without the hand there, right? It would just be sort of this candid portrait of this odd-looking person with this wig and this costume and this, very, very strange expression. And you would look at it and you go, oh, that's kind of odd. But you wouldn't necessarily feel like it's a really interesting photograph. You would just think it's a photograph of an unusually attired person. And that would be about it. But the inclusion of the hand, the arm, especially that arm wrapped in this red coat, and this gesture, which is very aggressive, leading into the frame, makes for an incredibly interesting composition. It really starts, posing questions in terms of what's going on. Who is this? What's the relationship here? What the heck is happening? And I don't think those questions would be posed with as much curiosity if it had just been a picture of this person, if it had just been that candid portrait. The inclusion of this arm that has no relationship to this person in all likelihood makes for an interesting composition. And that's one of the challenges that we all have as photographers is trying to think of how these things that have no relationship to each other can end up resulting in making a really interesting photograph. Because this gesture of this hand creates this incredible tension within the frame that really makes the shot really intriguing. I mean, I really can't take my eyes off of it. I mean, you guys go through the Flickr pool just as much as I do. And, you're looking at all these thumbnails and you're waiting for a shot to pop out at you, for you to stop, to click on it, to enlarge it on the screen so you can see what's happening. This was one of those shots for me. And it's gestures like this that are a real challenge to make happen, because it's really pushing your ability to think beyond the literal, to think beyond the obvious. Because in the real world, when you're taking a look at a scene like this, you're not thinking about the connection between these two things. It's stuff that's just happening. You're just focused on one or the other. But within the context of the frame, you go, oh, wow, I can make something happen by bringing these two things together, or these three things together, in order to make an interesting shot. And I think this skill is sort of developed over time as you make more and more shots and you see other people do it and then you try to emulate it yourself. But, that can be part of the fun. That can be really part of the fun where all of a sudden you recognize the potential of moments like this and you make a photograph and you do it successfully and you go, wow, I really made something from nothing. There are few things as exciting when you pull that off. And here we have a shot by Dillon M photography, shot with a Leica M6 on film, and he scanned this using a plastic optic film scanner, 8200i. So we got no XF information here, but take a look at the shot. We have these three people walking down the street. No relationship to each other. They're not connected in any way personally. They're just three people walking in the same direction. But we suddenly make a connection. Why? Look at the gait. Look at how their legs are splayed all in exactly the same way, creating these sort of triangles here, here, here. The repetition of pattern creates the connection. All of a sudden, they are linked together, even though they're completely oblivious to each other in the frame. And that repetition of pattern, oh wow, that's something that provides that connection between all these different elements. Sometimes you don't have to have another person in order to create a repetition of pattern. Sometimes it's just the objects in the scene. They create these existing triangles. It can be light and shadow that creates these triangles. But whatever it is, anything that exhibits that pattern, we connect. It's like, connecting lines, dotted lines together. And it's what makes this picture work. We also have the benefit of great light, shadow, strong graphics, shape. All of that stuff is working really, really beautiful here. But look at the connection. You feel like these things are connected, and your eyes just travel like this throughout the frame. Because these things, as far as the viewer is concerned, they become connected. They're not disparate. Think about a lot of the pictures that we see in the Flickr pool, right? of people walking down the street, you usually do not make those connections between this person on the left-hand side of the frame and the person on the right-hand side of the frame. They're just all these people that are littered in the frame, but there's no resonance, there's no connection, there's no interplay between all of them. Because you have to use these elements that I'm talking about using color, using pattern, using shapes, using light and shadow, using all these things to sort of impose those relationships within the context of the frame, because that results in a really much more interesting photograph than yet another picture of a person walking down the street. Even if the person is an interesting character, after a while that becomes exhausting. You kind of exhaust the potential of such moments hunting for characters. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to make interesting photographs. And all the things that we talk about week after week after week about, owning the frame, being aware of the frame, controlling the frame in order to make pictures with impact, are using these tools, these visual tools, in order to make the better photographs. Because they're not going to happen because you get the latest camera or you get the latest lens or you learn the latest Photoshop trick. Man, that stuff, is an endless chase that ends up not resulting in much of nothing. This stuff that we talk about each week, this is the stuff that makes better photographs and makes better photographers. So, as you go out and shoot this week, see if you can start looking for these things and start making your shots, about the relationships of all these things, not just the amount of stuff that you can squeeze into the frame. I think you'll find that your photography becomes that much more interesting and exciting for you. And if you're in the Los Angeles area on the weekend of February 13th, I'm going to be speaking at the Los Angeles Center of Photography in Hollywood, California, along with some other photographers, including Matt Stewart of In Public. And we're going to be talking all day about street photography. It starts around 12 o'clock, and we have very different street photographers all talking shop. And not only is it going to be the presenters, there are going to be a bunch of other people there who are as passionate about street photography as you and I are. And if you want to meet some other street photographers that you can, build relationships with and network, well, this is the place to be. And it's just $10 for people who aren't members of the Los Angeles Center of Photography. So I can't think of a better $10 to spend on a Saturday than at this event. I'm going to be there all day because I'm expecting to learn a lot myself and not just be there to present. And if you found us for the first time and you're wondering what this is all about, well, I host a podcast called the Candid Frame Photography Podcast, in which I interview photographers each week, and you can find more by going to thecandidframe.com. But this Flickr group is basically listeners to the show who submit their images to this community of growing photographers. And I pull images each week to discuss different aspects of photography like I did today. So hopefully you like what you see. And if you want to contribute and help slowly build this community, just ask to join and I'll be glad to do just that. Well, thanks for joining me again. And if you like what you're seeing here, please remember to subscribe and please spread the word. So thanks again for joining me, and I'll see you next time.